The announcement came through the station speakers at the worst possible moment. Right in the middle of Dale Rourke, mopping a puddle of blue coolant fluid off the floor of subcorridor B11. The voice was calm and flat, the way station announcements always were. Calm voices delivering terrible news. All personnel were to avoid subcorridors B7 through B14 and the entire lower maintenance ring until further notice. The message repeated twice and then went silent. Dale looked at his mop. He looked at the puddle. He looked at the wet floor sign he had already placed in front of the puddle. He was currently standing in subcorridor B10. He finished mopping the puddle. Then he picked up his wet floor sign and his cart and walked slowly back toward the main corridor junction. On his way out, he passed 3 station security officers moving in the opposite direction. They were wearing full-body shields and carrying long-range stun rods. One of them looked at Dale with the specific kind of horror that people reserve for someone doing something deeply foolish without knowing it. Dale nodded at them. They stared. He found out what was happening from Lyra, because Lyra always knew everything that was happening on the station before the official reports were even half written. She was waiting at the junction with 2 cups of commissary coffee, the terrible kind from level 4 that tasted like hot metal with ambitions, and the expression she wore when she had very important news and was about to enjoy delivering it far too much. "You just came out of B corridor," she said. "I had a coolant leak on my list." "Dale, the Vaukai is in B corridor." He took the coffee. It was just as bad as he remembered. The what? That was how he learned about the Vaukai. Lyra told him in pieces, the way people tell stories they are still processing themselves. 22 days ago, a classified transport had docked at Selim 7 for a routine fuel stop. On that transport, as part of a diplomatic entourage belonging to Commander Verk Dunseli of the Dreven people, there had been a Vaukai, the commander's bonded companion of over 30 years. During a chaotic period in the docking bay, with cargo haulers and crates and 6 species of dock workers all moving at once, the creature had slipped its escort. Nobody had noticed for 11 minutes. By the time they did, it was gone into the maintenance tunnels that ran under the station's lower ring like a second skeleton. 3 professional hunters had gone in after it. 2 came out under their own power. The third was still in the medical bay on level 6, conscious but unwilling to discuss what had happened in any detail. After that, Selim 7's administration had locked down the B corridors, contracted a team of Thurvaki specialist hunters, and was currently in the middle of a diplomatic headache that, according to Lyra, was making Administrator Brell's crest go flat every time someone mentioned the word Vaukai in his presence. Dale drank his terrible coffee. "What's a Vaukai?" he asked. Lyra gave him a look that suggested this was the wrong question to be asking after the story she had just told. Then she pulled out her station tablet and showed him. He looked at the image for a long time. The creature in the picture was big, roughly the mass of a large earth wolf, maybe a little heavier, with a build that was somewhere between feline and lupin without being either. 4 legs, a 5th limb that was clearly a tail but moved with too much intention to be anything passive. The fur was dark charcoal, and running along its spine from the base of its neck to the tip of its tail were streaks that seemed to glow silver-white in the photo, though the caption noted that the bioluminescence was dim when the creature was calm. 6 eyes, amber gold, set in 2 staggered rows in an angular skull with 2 sets of ears. The fangs visible at the edge of its mouth were slightly hollow at the tip, which the database note identified as delivery structures for a paralytic compound. Lyra pointed at the last line of the entry. He read it. Vaukai bond exclusively with chosen companions. Extended isolation from all social contact causes measurable cognitive and physiological deterioration. Prolonged solitary confinement without a bond companion is classified as a welfare crisis under compact biological standards. 22 days. Dale said. Lyra repeated, in the voice of someone who wanted him to say something more useful than hum. He handed her back the tablet. He thought about the maintenance tunnels under the Purring. He knew them better than most people on the station, because he was the one who repaired the coolant seals down there once a month when the cold cycling made them shrink and split. Dark corridors, narrow passages, a lot of places to disappear, a lot of places to sit and be scared and alone for 22 days. I've still got B12 on my list, he said. B12 is in the quarantine zone, Lyra said. The quarantine boundary runs along the junction wall. B12 starts technically on the other side. He picked up his cart. Technically. Lyra stared at him. Dale. I'll be careful. She called 3 things after him as he walked away. He caught 2 of them. He decided not to turn around. Subcorridor B9 was quiet and cold and smelled of old coolant and recycled air. The lights ran along the floor in a single dim strip, enough to work by, not enough to see anything farther than 10 meters ahead. Dale parked his cart, checked his work order, and started on the coolant seal at junction B9, 4, which had been on the repair list for 2 weeks and nobody had gotten to because everyone had found reasons to be elsewhere. He worked slowly. He was not in a hurry, and the seal was in worse shape than the work order had described, which meant it deserved proper attention. The station made sounds around him, the distant hum of the heating ducts, the soft tick of pipes cooling in the recycling cycle, the small mechanical whispers that a station this size made constantly, like breathing. He was halfway through repacking the seal housing when he heard the other sound. It was not a growl. It was not a roar. It was lower than either of those things, a pressure more than a noise, something he felt in his molars and behind his sternum before he actually registered it as sound, a vibration that had weight to it. He stopped working. He did not stand up quickly. He did not turn on his extra light. He sat very still for a moment and let his eyes adjust to the dark beyond the work lamp's reach, and then he did the same thing he always did when he came across something unexpected in a tight space. He thought about it calmly, the way his father had taught him to think about large animals encountered in low light on the farming station where he grew up. Don't run, don't make yourself big, don't make yourself small, just be. He reached into his kit bag, found his thermos by feel, and poured himself half a cup of coffee. He set the thermos down gently. He drank the coffee slowly, both hands visible, his posture easy, his breathing steady. In the dark beyond the work lamp, at a distance he estimated was about 8 meters, 2 rows of 6 amber gold eyes opened. They were dim, tired. There was nothing predatory in them at this moment, only the wary, exhausted look of something that had been frightened for a very long time and had learned to treat every presence as a threat because every presence had been one. Dale looked at them for a moment, then he looked back at his work. "You look terrible," he said quietly, in the conversational tone he used when talking to machines or jammed pipe fittings or the general situation. "You eaten recently?" The eyes did not move. He reached into the side pocket of his kit bag where he kept his personal snacks and found the protein bar he'd put there this morning and forgotten about, dense, nutritious, utterly flavorless, the kind of thing he carried because it was practical rather than because it was good. He broke it in half. He ate one half slowly. He set the other half on the floor of the corridor about 3 meters from where he was sitting. Then he turned back to the seal housing and kept working. He finished the seal. He ran the pressure test. He noted the repair in his log. He packed his tools back into his kit bag. He stood up slowly, picked up his cart, and started walking back toward the corridor junction. The half-protein bar was gone. He did not look back to confirm this. He noted it, the way he noted details on a work order, filed it in the part of his mind where useful information lived, and kept walking. That evening in his quarters, he pulled up the full station database entry on Voakai. It was longer than the public summary. He read it carefully, all the way to the end, including the section on bonding biology, and the section on dietary requirements, and the section on what prolonged isolation did to a creature that had evolved over millions of years to never, under any circumstances, be alone. He sat with that for a while. Then he found a pen, turned over a paper supply receipt he'd been using as a bookmark, and wrote a grocery list. It was longer than his usual grocery lists, and it had nothing on it that he personally ate. 17 lore systems. That was the number Senior Hunter Mock's tavern reported to Administrator Brell on day 23, in the flat and slightly resentful tone of a professional who is beginning to suspect he is being made to look foolish. 17 different lore configurations had been deployed through the Purring tunnels, scent attractors, resonance emitters, biofrequency mimics that his team had used successfully on 6 other Volkai retrieval operations across 3 different star systems. Grath, which was what Commander Verk called the creature, though Mox had been told this name in a tone that implied he was not expected to use it, had evaded all 17, not just avoided them. The tracker logs showed something worse than avoidance. The creature had, in several cases, moved toward the devices, examined them at close range based on the heat signatures, and then deliberately gone in the opposite direction. It was learning their patterns. Mox did not include this interpretation in his written report. He noted the data and kept the interpretation to himself, because putting it in writing felt like admitting something he was not yet ready to admit. Dale was not in any of these meetings. Nobody thought to tell him about the tracker drone sweep scheduled for the B9 area on day 23. This was an oversight that would matter later. He came back to B9 the next morning on the official record as performing secondary maintenance checks on the junction seals from the previous day's repair, which was technically accurate, since a proper repair did include a follow-up inspection. He brought his cart. He brought his thermos. He brought a sealed packet of high-grade synth meat that he had purchased from the commissary the previous afternoon, spending a modest but noticeable portion of his weekly allowance, and which the commissary worker had looked at with some puzzlement because it was not the kind of thing maintenance crew typically bought. He sat down in the same spot. He checked the seal he had repaired. It was holding perfectly, which he noted with professional satisfaction. Then he opened the synth meat packet and set it on the floor 3 meters away. He poured his coffee, and he waited. He did not call out. He did not use light signals or sounds. He simply sat and existed in the space, relaxed and unhurried, the way he existed anywhere he had work to do. After a while, he started talking, not to the dark specifically, just talking the way he always did when he was working alone, a quiet running commentary on nothing in particular. He talked about the coolant seal and how the housing material on these older junction models always shrank wrong in cold cycles. He talked about the terrible coffee from level 4 and how the commissary on level 2 was marginally better but required a longer walk. He talked about a dog he had grown up with on his family's farming station. A large, deeply stupid, thoroughly beloved animal named Beryl who had been afraid of rain and had once eaten an entire hydroponics manual and seemed entirely well afterward. He was explaining Beryl's complicated relationship with the station's automated irrigation alerts when he heard the soft press of weight on the corridor floor. He did not look directly at it. He kept talking. He shifted his eyes sideways, very slowly, the way his father had taught him. Peripheral vision does less to trigger flight responses in animals than direct eye contact. In his peripheral vision, he saw the shape move from the deep dark into the dim edge of the work lamp's reach. Closer than yesterday, significantly closer. The synth meat disappeared. Dale kept talking. He refilled his coffee cup. He spent another 40 minutes in the corridor, describing Beryl's one successful attempt to open a refrigeration unit and the consequences for the family's entire week of groceries. At no point did he try to move closer. At no point did he reach toward the creature. He simply shared the space, the way you share a room with something that needs to get used to you on its own schedule. When he left, he noted in his maintenance log that the B9 junction seals were performing within acceptable parameters, and a follow-up check was recommended in 72 hours. Lyra intercepted him at the corridor junction at exactly the wrong moment, which was to say, the moment she had clearly planned to intercept him, which meant it was exactly the right moment for her purposes. She had not followed him into the tunnel. Something in the dark near B9's entrance had made a very quiet sound, and she had made the intelligent decision to wait outside. She was leaning against the wall with her arms folded, and the expression of someone who has spent the last 40 minutes reconsidering their entire friendship. "You went back," she said. "I had a follow-up inspection. Dale, I stood at the junction entrance, and I heard something in there that made my whole spine want to leave my body without me." She was just checking to see who was there. The words she seemed to land in the air between them. Lyra looked at him for a long moment. She unfolded her arms and refolded them higher, which was what she did when she was adjusting to new information she had not asked for. "You got close enough to determine it's female." "No, the database profile for the commander's companion uses that term." "You researched her specifically." "I wanted to know her dietary needs." Lyra stared at him. "You bought those synth meat packs for the apex predator living in the maintenance tunnels." "She's not eating properly. She's been down there 23 days. Whatever she's been catching in the tunnels, it's not enough. You could see it in the energy readings from the first sensor sweep." He picked up his cart. "I'll split the cost with you if the commissary bill gets flagged." "I'm not worried about the commissary bill, I'm worried about the apex predator," Lyra said. But she was already thinking about it, he could tell, because she had stopped arguing and started calculating. Lyra-san had never in her life let practicality stop her from doing something she thought was right, which was one of the things Dale had always respected about her. "What does she need? Protein-to-fat ratio, I mean." "The synth meat you bought is muscle tissue equivalent, but Voakai in the wild supplement, with organ tissue for certain micronutrients. The commissary on level 3 carries organ-equivalent synth packs as a specialty item." "Of course you already know that." She pushed off the wall. "Fine, I'll handle the sourcing. You're going to get yourself eaten, and I refuse to let it happen on a protein deficiency." Over the next 4 days, Dale came back each morning. Each morning the food disappeared faster. Each morning the shape in the dark was a little closer when he arrived and moved a little less when he talked. On the 3rd day she was close enough that the work lamp caught her fully, and he saw the matted fur, the dull spine lights that should have been brighter, and the way her left forepaw touched the ground with slightly less weight than it should. He noted all of this. He did not reach toward her. On the 4th day he came with the synth meat, and with a basic wound seal kit from the maintenance medical supplies, the kind kept in every corridor cabinet for minor cuts and chemical burns. He set the food down as usual, and then he opened the wound seal kit and laid the contents out on the floor in front of him, slowly, nomming each item as he set it down in the same conversational tone he used for everything else. "This is a cleaning swab. This is wound sealant. It bonds over cuts and keeps them closed while they heal. This is a cooling strip. It goes over inflammation. None of it is going to feel great, but it should help." He left the kit in easy reach. He did not move toward her. "Your call entirely," he said. "I'm just going to work on the pipe housing over here." He worked on the pipe housing. It did not particularly need work, but he found things to check. Behind him, he heard the soft, tentative sound of something approaching the kit. He heard the components being sniffed, examined, turned over. He heard the pause before a decision. Then he felt the faintest warmth behind his left shoulder, and a weight that was not quite a touch, but was in the space where a touch might happen. He kept working. Very carefully, very steadily. He did not turn around. After a while he felt her settle not quite against him, but in the space beside him, close enough that the low, subsonic vibration she made became something he felt in the back of his ribcage, like the hum of a distant engine, like the resonance of a very large, very quiet machine finding its resting frequency. He kept working. On the sixth day, Mox Tavern's latest tracker drone swept through B9 at 8:40 station time, moving in a grid pattern through the lower corridors. It entered B9 approximately 12 minutes after Dale had arrived. Dale heard it coming, a faint mechanical whir at the edge of his hearing. He felt the change before he turned around. The air in the corridor shifted, the warmth beside him went rigid, and the dim gold of the spine lights flared without warning to a white so sharp it lit the whole corridor like a system alarm. He turned. He saw the drone moving toward them at about 20 meters. He saw Grath low, spine fully extended, 6 eyes blazing, the full weight of her body coiled into the particular kind of stillness that is not calm but the moment before a storm. He stepped sideways, not in front of her, he knew better than that, but into the drone's line of sensor sweep, between it and the brightness of her spine lights. "Nothing here," he said clearly, in the firm and slightly bored voice he used when telling station machinery what it was looking at. "Move on." The drone's sensors were automated. They read no flagged biological signatures. Grath had gone absolutely dark in the moment he moved. Spine lights extinguished, heat signature dropped to near ambient. Every system in her body apparently capable of going silent when she chose. The drone registered 1 human maintenance worker, 1 cart, standard equipment. It moved on. The corridor was quiet. Dale did not move for a moment. Then he let out a breath and reached for his thermos with the steady hands of someone who has decided not to think about how close that was until later. He felt the shift in the air behind him again, lighter this time, slower. He did not turn around. He heard her follow him to the corridor junction when he finally left soft footfalls behind him, stopping where the maintenance tunnel met the main ring. He did not look back. He kept walking. That night, Dale came back to his quarters at the end of his shift, turned the corner into the side passage where his door was, and stopped. She was sitting in front of his door. She was not hiding. She was not coiled, not defensive. She was simply sitting there in the corridor light with her spine lights a low and tired gold, watching him approach with 6 eyes that had the look of something that had made a decision and was waiting to see if the decision was correct. Dale stood in the corridor for a moment. He looked at her, she looked at him. He thought about the compact database entry, and the bonding biology section, and the part about chosen companions, and the particular way that a Volkai apparently decided whether or not the being in front of it was worth placing 30 years of absolute trust in. "Well," he said, he reached past her and opened the door. "I only have 1 bed." She walked inside. He followed. He set his kit bag down. He looked at the small space that was his quarters and the large creature who was now standing in the middle of it, and he reorganized in his head a handful of practical things that were going to need adjusting going forward. Then he made 2 of his terrible thermos coffees out of habit, because he always made 2 and sat down in his chair, and she lay down across his feet, and the subsonic hum started again, deep and slow, moving through the floor and into his bones like something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for a quiet place to land. There is a particular kind of grief that belongs to waiting rooms and counting days. Commander Verk Dunseli had not slept more than 4 hours in any given night cycle since the 31st day of the search, and it showed in the way he stood, which was still upright, still controlled, still every centimeter the senior compact military officer he had been for 4 decades, but with something behind his eyes that had gone very quiet. Not dead, just quiet in the way of deep water. He did not speak about it. Driven commanders did not speak about certain kinds of loss. What he did instead was stand in his temporary quarters on Selim 7 and look at a small holographic token that he kept on the table beside his bunk. The holograph showed him younger, much younger, which was not something he often let himself dwell on, sitting on the ground in a sunlit training yard on Dreven Prime, with a creature climbing over his shoulders with the absolute confident chaos of something very young and very certain it owned everything in its immediate vicinity. Enormous paws, spine lights blazing bright silver because everything was exciting, 6 eyes half closed in what could only be called smugness. 31 years ago. He touched the edge of the holograph, which was a thing he would not have allowed himself to do in front of anyone. Then his communicator signaled, and he put the token away and answered. It was Mock's Tavern, calling in his morning update. 9 days with no sightings. The creature had essentially stopped existing from the perspective of all the equipment the team was using. Mox's voice had the controlled irritation of a professional who had exhausted his professional solutions and was not yet ready to say so aloud. He suggested expanding the search to the outer hull maintenance conduits. He suggested increasing the frequency of drone sweeps. He suggested another attempt with the long-range bioresonance scanner, despite the fact that it had returned nothing useful in 3 previous attempts. Verk approved all of it and closed the channel. He stood very still in his quarters for a moment. Then he put on his coat, because it was what he did in the mornings, and went to face another day of waiting. He did not know that 9 corridors and 2 maintenance rings away, the thing he was waiting for was currently sitting on a level 5 sanitation worker's feet. Dale, at the same moment that Verk was approving Mox's search expansions, was trying to eat breakfast at his small table, while Grath watched him from the floor with the expression of something that had opinions about his food choices. She had been in his quarters for 8 days. In those 8 days, he had made a series of quiet, practical adjustments to his living situation. The floor space beside his bunk had been cleared. She preferred to sleep there, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her but not pressed against him, because she was still, in some deep part of herself, a creature that had spent a month teaching itself to stay alert. He had requisitioned a secondary ventilation access for his corridor section, officially logging it as an air circulation upgrade, which was technically true, and which also happened to create a secondary entrance to his quarters through the maintenance tunnel junction, a route that Grath could use to move in and out without appearing in any corridor sensor logs. He had submitted a request for enhanced bioseal maintenance on his level's air filtration, which required a physical inspection twice a week, which gave him a legitimate reason to be in the maintenance tunnels on a regular schedule with a large amount of food supplies in his cart. He had eaten 2 of his work gloves and 1 station maintenance manual. That was Grath, not him, though he had written it that way in his head as a comfortable kind of ownership. She had also, twice, knocked his thermos off the table and then looked at the result with the specific detached interest of a scientist who has just confirmed a hypothesis about gravity. He had not reported any of this. Lyra visited on day 30 of the disappearance, which was Grath's 8th day in Dale's quarters, slipping through the main door while Dale held it and watching with the careful calm of someone walking into a room she had calculated the risks of very thoroughly. She stood near the door for a moment. Grath lifted her head from across the room, spine lights at a neutral and uninterested gold, and looked at Lyra with 4 of her 6 eyes. Lyra looked back. "She's brighter," Lyra said quietly. She meant the spine lights. The bioluminescence was warmer and more even than the dead, patchy glow of the first sighting. The fur is better too. When I saw her from the tunnel entrance that first time, it was almost gray. "She's eating well," Dale said, "and sleeping. She sleeps a lot." "She's recovering." Lyra moved to the chair he had pushed toward the center of the room, away from Grath's floor space. Visible from where Grath lay in the open, all of this was deliberate and they both knew it and neither of them said so. "Dale, I've been reading everything I can find about Vorkai biology." She paused. "Do you understand what's happening here? Biologically, I mean." She needed somewhere safe. "That's true, but Dale, Vorkai don't use beings as shelter. Their bonding response is not a temporary behavior, it's a full physiological shift. The research shows measurable changes in hormone production, neurochemistry, immune function. All of it reorganizes around a chosen companion. She watched Grath, who had set her chin back on her forelegs. She hasn't found a hiding spot. She's claimed you. Dale was quiet for a moment. He looked at the creature on his floor, the slow rise and fall of the dark charcoal fur, the dim gold of the spine lights pulsing with something that matched her breathing. He thought about the protein bar in the dark corridor. He thought about 31 years in a holographic token that someone was probably looking at right now, alone in a temporary room and not sleeping. "Is she okay?" he said. "The bonding, is it good for her? Is she healthier?" "Yes, significantly." Lyra looked at him. "The isolation was going to kill her, Dale. Not quickly, but yes, this is good for her. Biologically, this is exactly what she needed." "Good," Dale said, and got up to refill the coffee that he had been letting go cold, because a decision had been made somewhere in his chest about 30 seconds ago, and the conversation could now move on. Lyra watched him. She had the expression she always wore when he did something that she found both completely understandable and mildly infuriating. "You're not going to think about the other part of this. The bonding biology, and what it means for me specifically." "Yes. I read the database entry. I know what it means." He poured the coffee. "I've known for about a week." And he brought the coffee back and sat down and looked at Lyra across the small room with the steady expression of a man who has done his thinking and arrived somewhere comfortable. "And she's okay. And she chose this. And I'm not going to make her unchoose it." Lyra was silent for a long moment. "You know the commander is on the station," she said. "Yes. And Verk is going to find out." "Probably. And then there's going to be a very significant political situation." "Probably." Grath made a low sound from the floor. Not distressed, just present. Something between a check and a comment. Dale looked at her. She looked back at him. "I'll deal with it when it happens," he said. "Until then, she's fine and she's safe, and that's the important part." He genuinely meant this, which was what made it both admirable and quietly maddening to everyone around him. The situation, as Lyra had predicted, was beginning to move toward finding him whether he went looking for it or not. Selam 7's automated systems were thorough in the specific, bureaucratic way of systems that have been designed to notice small things. On day 31 of the search, the station's quarterly energy audit flagged a routine query. Dale's corridor section was drawing marginally more power than its allocated load. Not much, barely a rounding error in the overall station draw, but enough for the audit system to generate a low-priority notification and route it to the administrator's office for review. Administrator Brel Ostova received approximately 300 such notifications in the course of a normal week. Most of them were dismissed by his secondary staff before they reached his personal queue. This one reached him because it came in during the Volkai crisis period, which meant anything related to the Beering maintenance sections was flagged for his direct attention. He read the notification. He opened the station map. He looked at the energy draw location, which was a small set of crew quarters in the maintenance ring-off corridor B9. He sat with the map for a while. He looked at the last confirmed Volkai sighting log, which was pinned to his secondary display and had been there for 31 days. He noted the location. He looked at the map again. He opened the personnel file for the crew quarters in question. He read it slowly and carefully: work history, transfer record, maintenance assignments, performance log. No disciplinary notes. Regular shift completion. 2 commendations for thoroughness. 1 note from a previous posting about unusual calm under pressure during a docking emergency that the posting supervisor had apparently found worth recording. He sat with all of this for a considerably longer time than the energy audit notification technically warranted. Then he closed both files, stood up, and walked to the door of his office. He stood there with his hand on the frame for a moment, looking out at his administration staff going about their morning work. He was thinking about a number of things at once, which was something he was good at. He was thinking about Commander Verk, who had not slept properly in 31 days. He was thinking about 32 trained specialists and 17 lore systems and 3 hospitalized hunters. He was thinking about a level 3 sanitation technician and a quarterly energy audit. He was thinking about what he was going to do with this information and how he was going to do it. He needed to think more carefully. He went back to his desk. He poured himself the Orvani equivalent of tea from the environmental unit that kept his office at a slightly higher methane concentration than the rest of the station, a small comfort, far from home. He pulled up the personnel file again. He read the name. Dale Rourke. He set the file aside once more. He was going to need to be very careful about the order in which he did things next. Outside his office, across 2 corridors and a maintenance ring, Dale's shift had ended. He walked home with his kit bag on his shoulder and turned the corner into his side passage and found Grath waiting outside his door exactly as she had every evening for 8 days, not because she could not get in through the secondary tunnel access, but because she seemed to prefer to wait for him. He opened the door. She walked inside. He followed, and the door closed behind them both, and the station turned in the dark around that small and quiet room, and nobody on the outside of it yet understood what was inside it. The meeting was not announced on any general channel. Administrator Brell called it for the 3rd hour of the early shift, when the station's corridors were quiet, and most of the overnight crew had not yet come off rotation. He asked for Commander Verk, Senior Hunter Mox Tavern, and nobody else. He did not tell them what it was about. They came because, when an administrator of a compact station calls a private early shift, meeting with those exact 2 people, something has either gone very badly or very well, and everyone in the room wants to know which before the news reaches anyone else. Brell's office was not large. It held a desk, a station display wall, 3 chairs that were sized for different species in the uncomfortable compromise way of multi-species furniture, and a secondary environmental unit that gave the air a faint mineral sharpness that the Orvani found comfortable, and the other 2 found easier to ignore than to mention. Brell stood at the display wall rather than sitting. This was, they would both recognize later, a deliberate choice. "I want to show you something," he said. "I'm going to ask that you let me present it entirely before either of you respond." He brought up the station map. He brought up the maintenance logs from the Purring tunnel system, time-stamped and routed by sector. He brought up the energy audit notification. He brought up the personnel file. He laid all of it out on the display without comment, one element at a time, in the careful and methodical order of an administrator who had spent a long night thinking about exactly how to sequence information so it could be properly understood. The last confirmed sighting of the Volkai, the date, the location. A maintenance repair order logged to subcorridor B9 the following morning, the technician's name. Follow-up maintenance visits, 7 of them on consecutive days, all logged legitimately, all within a reasonable interpretation of the technician's assigned work area. The date the Volkai's signatures had disappeared entirely from all sensor sweeps, which was also the date the energy consumption in a particular set of crew quarters had begun to run slightly high. An unusual requisition for secondary ventilation access in that same crew section, submitted on routine maintenance grounds. A commissary purchase history, high-grade protein packs. Organ-equivalent synth supplements, consistently purchased in quantities that did not match a human's dietary requirements. Brell stopped there. He let the display hold everything at once. The room was quiet for long enough that the environmental unit made a small cycling sound that everyone heard clearly. Mox Tavern's face had gone through several different things during the presentation, none of which he had managed to keep entirely off it. He was currently on something that lived between disbelief and a very controlled professional horror. 17 lore systems, 3 bioresonance scans, 32 trained specialists. He said nothing. He was doing the math of what this implied about his entire operation, and the math was not coming out in his favor. Verk had not moved. He was looking at the display wall with the stillness of someone who has learned, over many decades, to hold very large feelings behind a controlled face. But Brel, who had been watching him carefully, saw the small thing that happened at the base of his throat when the timeline became clear. A tightening, quickly controlled, the involuntary physical register of relief arriving too fast for dignity. He had not let himself hope, and then the hope had arrived anyway, like light under a door he had thought was sealed. "I have not yet confirmed this in person," Brel said carefully. "I wanted your guidance on how to proceed, because if I am reading this correctly," he paused, and chose his next words with the precision of someone who understood that how a thing is said shapes how it is received. "Our situation has been resolved by a level 3 sanitation technician, who has told no one." Mox's control broke first, but only into a single word. He said it in Thervaki. Brel did not speak Thervaki, but the translator collar rendered the general category of the sentiment clearly enough. Verk said nothing. "I want him brought in," Verk said finally. His voice was very even. "Not security, not formally, just brought in." "I've already sent a request," Brel said. "He should be here within the half hour." He was there in 20 minutes, because Dale Rourke walked at a steady pace and did not find reasons to delay when he had been asked to go somewhere. He came in his work clothes, which were clean and pressed but were still work clothes, and he carried nothing with him because the message had said to come to the administrator's office and had not specified that he needed to bring anything. He looked at the 3 people in the room. He looked at the display wall, which Brel had left up. His eyes went to Verk last and stayed there for a moment. Brel watched him do this and found it interesting. Not afraid, not caught. The expression was something more like the one Brel associated with beings who had been carrying a weight and were now looking at the person the weight actually belonged to. "Mr. Rourke," Brel said, "I'll be direct with you because you seem like a person who prefers that. We believe we may have identified the location of the missing Volkai. I'd like to hear what you know about that." Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Verk again directly, with a steadiness that Verk would think about later. "Is she in trouble," he said, "for hiding?" Verk blinked. Whatever he had prepared to feel in this conversation, this was not the shape it had come in. "No," he said, "she is not." Dale nodded. "She's with me. She's been with me for about 2 weeks." The room was quiet again, a different kind of quiet from before. Mox made a sound. He converted it, not entirely successfully, into a cough. Verk said, "How?" Not how did you find her, not how did you catch her, just how, open-ended, because those were not the right questions and he seemed to know it. Dale explained. He did it the way he did most things, plainly, in order, without decoration. He described the first night, the protein bar, the decision not to run. He described coming back. He described the food and the talking and the work and the slow arithmetic of presence. He described the drone and what he had done about the drone and why he had done it. He described her following him home. He did not describe it as heroism or strategy or anything that required a particular kind of word. He described it as a series of mornings in which he had shown up and not left. When he finished, Mox was staring at the far wall in a way that suggested he was conducting a very thorough internal review of the past 31 days, and finding it did not survive contact with this account. Verk said, "You understand what a Volkai bond means?" "I looked it up," Dale said. "When she followed me home, I spent a while reading about it." "And you understand that she has, by the biology of my people and the law that follows from it, formally claimed you." "I understood that might be the case, about a week ago." "A beat." And you said nothing. Dale considered this. He did not look defensive or ashamed or calculating. He looked like a man who had thought about something carefully and had come to a conclusion that made sense to him. It wasn't my news to say. It seemed like something you should see for yourself. Verk looked at him for a long moment. He was 63 years old. He had commanded 6 vessels and 2 planetary garrisons, and had sat across negotiating tables from beings whose ideas about value and obligation were so different from his own that entire teams of translators had barely bridged the gap. He had never, in 63 years, had any difficulty deciding how he felt about a situation. He was having some difficulty now. "Take us to her," he said. They went through the corridors, the 4 of them, oddly spaced, not quite a formal group, and Brel found himself watching the human walk and thinking about 31 days and 17 lure systems, and 3 trained hunters in the medical bay. He found himself revising something he had been carrying since the first briefing about Vorkai behavior, which had emphasized speed, strength, intelligence, predator-threat response. All of that was true. He had simply never heard anyone explain what the other side of it looked like. Dale opened his quarters door. The room smelled different from a standard crew quarters, warmer, something underneath the recycled air that was faintly alive in a way that the station's air usually was not. The lights were at a low setting, and the floor space had been rearranged in ways that were entirely practical and made complete sense the moment you saw them. Grath was on the floor near the bunk. She lifted her head when the door opened and Verk stepped through. Her spine lights shifted, a brightening, a warmth, the deep muscle memory of 31 years of a bond that had not been broken by any of this, only displaced, put down for a while and picked up again now in a room she had not expected. She rose and crossed to him with the directness of something that had made a decision about how to handle competing pulls and had decided to be straightforward about it. She pressed her head against his hand. He stopped moving. He let her. He set his other hand on the side of her neck where the spine lights ran brightest, and he stood there with his eyes closed for exactly long enough to be human about it, or whatever the driven equivalent of human about it was, and then he opened his eyes and let her go. She turned around. She walked back to Dale and sat against his leg, her full weight easy against him, her spine lights dropping back to the steady warm gold they held when she had decided a situation was fine. The subsonic hum filled the small room. Verk watched this. He watched the way she sat, the angles of it, the specific quality of the ease, which was not the ease of an animal resting, but the ease of something that had found the precise location where it felt most complete. He watched the human beside her, who had his hand resting near her shoulder without quite touching her, and was watching Verk back with the kind of respectful attention that does not require anything. "She chose you," Verk said. It was not quite a question and not quite an accusation. It was a statement being tested against reality. "I think she needed someone who wasn't afraid of her," Dale said. Mox Tavern, standing in the doorway with the expression of someone actively composing a professionally viable account of the last 31 days for the report he was going to have to write, said nothing at all. Brel, who had also said nothing since they had arrived, was thinking about something the records had said about Vorkai behavioral studies. A single line in a scientific summary from the Dreven Academy of Natural Studies. Something about how the bonding response was not triggered by strength or compatibility of species, but by a very specific quality in the potential companion's behavior in the critical window. The quality the study had named was steadiness. It was a Dreven word that the translators rendered as steadiness because it was the closest equivalent, though the actual word encompassed something slightly broader, not just the absence of fear, but the active choice to remain present in the face of something that could take you apart. The willingness to stay. He thought about 17 lure systems. He thought about a half-protein bar set on the floor of a dark corridor. He thought about what Verk had just said. She needed someone who wasn't afraid of her. He thought about what Dale had actually said, and he thought carefully that those were not the same thing, because the human had said wasn't afraid, not as not afraid, he said it as a need, as a thing she was looking for. Maybe, Brell thought, she had not been looking for someone unafraid of her. Maybe she had been looking for someone who was afraid and stayed anyway, who felt the fear and set food on the floor regardless. He filed this thought away. It would matter later in the conversations that were coming, when people started asking questions that deserved better answers than anyone had given them so far. For now, he stood in the doorway of a maintenance worker's small room on Selam 7 and watched a Volkai press warmth against a human janitor's leg like she had always been there. And he thought that the galaxy had been looking in very many wrong places. News on a station the size of Selam 7 does not travel the way news travels in open space. In open space, a signal goes out and disperses. On a station, it moves like water through a pipe system, contained, pressurized, finding every small gap and crack, arriving in unexpected places at unexpected pressure. By the time the first shift change of the following day had completed, there was not a maintenance worker, cargo handler, or kitchen crew member on Selam 7 who had not heard something about the janitor and the Volkai. Most of what they had heard was accurate. This was unusual for station gossip, but the story was strange enough that embellishment seemed unnecessary. The official channels were considerably more complicated. The Dreven cultural attaché's name was Torvin, and he had been stationed on Selam 7 as part of Commander Verk's diplomatic entourage for the duration of the search operation. He was a careful, precise being who had spent 30 years navigating the intersection of Dreven law and compact bureaucracy, and he was good at his work, and he was currently experiencing something that none of his 30 years had adequately prepared him for. The problem was not that a Volkai had bonded with a non-Dreven. That had happened before, rarely. The historical record included 4 documented cases across the past 2 centuries. The law had always been written without species restriction, because the bonding response had always been the criterion, not the being. This had felt, historically, like an academic detail. The problem was not that the new bondholder was human. Torvin had no particular position on humans. He had not thought about them enough to have one, which was itself perhaps part of the problem. They were a junior compact member species, which meant they were notable primarily for being peripheral. The problem was both of those things together. In this specific context, in front of this specific audience, at this specific moment in compact diplomatic history, when the Dreven people were negotiating 3 separate resource treaties, and did not need a story about their most culturally significant living creature sitting in a maintenance worker's quarters to become the most discussed thing in the lower ring of a logistics station. Torvin composed 7 messages to the Dreven Cultural Council in the first 6 hours. He sent 2 of them. The other 5 he deleted because they said things that were accurate but unhelpful. The Compact Cultural Committee, which oversaw interspecies biological agreements, sent their own message, a formal query regarding the feasibility of bond dissolution, which was the committee's precise and clinical way of asking whether the situation could be undone. The query was routed to Brell first, then forwarded to Verk with a notation from Brell that said, in the careful language of someone choosing words that would survive being quoted, that he was transmitting the query as received, and that his own assessment of the situation was available separately upon request. Verk read the query once and set it aside. He called for Dale that afternoon, not to the administrator's office this time, to his own temporary quarters. He wanted to have a specific conversation without the architecture of an official room around it. Dale came. He sat down when offered the chair. He accepted the drink that was placed in front of him with the easy manner of someone who can accept hospitality in an unfamiliar context without making it awkward. He looked at Verk and waited, because he was apparently a person who was capable of simply waiting when something important was about to be said. Verk had prepared what he wanted to say. He said it directly, because the human seemed to respond well to directness, and because Verk did not have the patience for anything else at this point in the day. He talked about the bond, not the cultural and political dimensions, he would get to those, but the biological reality first. The lifespan dimension. Grath, at 31, was approaching middle age by Volkai standards. She could live another century. Dale, realistically, had perhaps 50 years ahead of him if he was fortunate. The bond did not end with the death of a companion. It changed. The research on Volkai who had outlived bond companions described a long process of grief and reformation. It was not a comfortable thing to know. The obligation dimension. A bond companion was not an owner. The language did not exist in Driven for ownership of a Volkai. What existed was a mutual obligation, the companion's responsibility to the Volkai's welfare and the Volkai's absolute loyalty in return. This was not a metaphor. It was a documented biological reality. Grath would follow Dale to any location he went. She would be unable to comfortably maintain any distance from him beyond a certain threshold. His choices would shape her life in ways that nothing else could. The practical dimensions. The permission structures required for a Volkai to be present on a compact station were not simple. There would be paperwork. There would be committee reviews. There would be formal requests to the Driven cultural body, to the compact biological oversight division, to the specific administration of any location where Dale intended to live or work. All of this would have to be navigated. None of it was impossible, but none of it was small. He said all of this without softening it. He had respected the human enough in the past 24 hours to give him the full weight of the thing. Dale listened to all of it. He did not shift in his seat or show the signs of someone being overwhelmed. He had the look of a person holding each piece of information and setting it somewhere useful as it arrived. When Verk finished, Dale said, "Is she going to be okay, long-term, with this being the situation? Is this good for her?" Verk said yes. Clearly. The bond was complete and deeply set, and everything in Grath's biology indicated full recovery and stable health within what the research described as a normal recovery arc from prolonged isolation stress. She was going to be fine. Dale nodded. "Then I'm in," he said, simply, as though it were the only logical conclusion of the preceding information. Verk looked at him. He was aware that this was the 4th or 5th time in 2 days that this human had said something that created a small pause in Verk's ability to process. He was beginning to suspect this was less a coincidence and more a consistent quality of the person. "You are not afraid of what this will cost you," Verk said. It was meant as an observation. It came out sounding slightly like a question. Dale considered it with the seriousness it seemed to deserve. "I spent 2 years on a freight hauler doing emergency seal repairs in zero gravity during magnetic storm events, in the dark, with bad equipment, alone." He turned his cup in his hands. "This doesn't seem harder than that." Verk made a sound. It began in the back of his throat and arrived in the air as something that, if Verk had been a different person in a different situation, would have been the beginning of a laugh. He controlled it. He turned it into a quiet exhale. "You will have difficulty with Torvin," he said. "The attaché. He is not unreasonable, but he has spent 30 years maintaining a very precise picture of what Driven law and compact relations look like, and your situation does not fit that picture. What does he need from me? Right now, he needs time. He will have to revise things. He is a person who revises carefully." Verk was quiet for a moment. "I will speak to the council. That is my responsibility, not yours. What the committee is suggesting," he meant the bond dissolution query, though he did not name it, "is not going to happen. I want you to understand that clearly. That option is not on the table. It was not on the table the moment I walked into your quarters and saw her." Dale looked at him. Something in his expression shifted, not visibly much, but Verk had spent 31 years reading the near-invisible signals of a creature whose emotional states were sometimes microscopic and sometimes enormous, and he had gotten very good at registering things that were almost nothing. Dale's almost nothing was relief, quickly housed in the same steadiness that seemed to be his resting expression. "Thank you," Dale said. "She would not have survived it," Verk said, "and I would not have asked it." They sat for a moment in the kind of quiet that two beings who understand each other's priorities can share without requiring it to be discussed. Then Verk told him about what was coming, the formal sessions, the documentation, the process of creating a legal framework that had never existed before because this situation had never existed before. He told him that there would be coverage, because news of this kind always found its audience. He told him that some of what was coming would be annoying, and some would be genuinely difficult, and that he, Verk, would be prepared to speak for the legitimacy of the bond at any level it needed to be spoken at. What he said to the Dreven Council that evening was not a long statement. It was 3 paragraphs, formal and precise, and as close to final as his rank and reputation allowed him to make it. It said that the bond was documented, verified, and biologically complete. It said that Dreven law required only the bond itself as the criterion for companion recognition, and that no provision of that law specified a species requirement, because no such requirement had ever been necessary, and the absence of it was now demonstrating itself to be a feature rather than an oversight. It said that he was prepared to defend this position formally and publicly and repeatedly, and that he recommended the Council proceed on this basis, rather than in the alternative direction, which he declined to dignify by nomming. The Council's response took 3 days. In those 3 days, Torvin composed 14 messages. He sent 5. The response, when it came, was cautious and qualified in the way of bodies that are being moved in a direction they had not anticipated and need time to settle into. But it came. Recognition of the bond under existing law, pending formal documentation and the standard observer review. No dissolution. No override. Brell received the news and filed the appropriate compact notifications, and submitted the provisional companion permit, with a speed that suggested he had been holding the paperwork ready. Dale received the notification in his quarters at the end of his shift, sitting in his chair with Grath across his feet. He read it once, set the tablet down, and told Grath about it in the same conversational tone he used for everything. She did not respond in words, because she was a Voakai and not a being of words, but the spinelights pulsed once, a warm, bright gold, and then settled back to their resting frequency, and the subsonic hum deepened slightly into something that felt, if you were inclined to interpret feelings through vibration in floorboards, like satisfaction. Dale went asleep. Grath stayed where she was and watched the door of the small room in the maintenance ring of Selam 7, and the station turned around them in the dark, and somewhere 3 decks up and 4 corridors over, a Dreven commander sat at his desk and looked at the holographic token on his table for a long time. The young Voakai in the image blazed silver with spinelights and sprawled across his younger shoulders. 31 years ago. He set the token down. He turned off the light. He slept for the first time in 38 days without waking. 3 months after the day Dale opened his quarters door to a room full of people holding their breath, a paper was published in the Compact Xenobiology Quarterly under the authorship of a researcher named Dr. Oval Brandt, who worked out of the Compact's Biological Studies Division, and had spent 6 weeks on Selam 7 observing, interviewing, and taking very careful notes. The paper was titled Voakai Stress Bond Recovery in a Non-Traditional Companion Context, a Case Study. It was 42 pages long, including appendices. The abstract described it as a clinical analysis of the physiological recovery arc of an adult Voakai following extended isolation stress, with focus on bonding stimulus variables. It was, By the standards of the compact Xenobiology Quarterly, an unusual paper. Most papers in the quarterly were read by a specific and limited audience of specialists who cared deeply about species-specific cellular chemistry and nobody else. This one got forwarded, and forwarded again. It left the quarterly and found its way into general circulation boards, and then into the summary feeds of the compact's cultural liaison offices, and then, eventually, into the kind of informal conversation that happens between beings of different species who are waiting for cargo transfers or sitting in commissary lines and saying, "Have you seen this?" The reason it spread was not the clinical analysis, which was detailed and thorough and of genuine interest to exactly the kind of specialist who read the quarterly. The reason it spread was the closing paragraph. Dr. Brandt, who wrote in the dry and precise language of her field across 41.5 pages, appeared to have allowed herself one paragraph at the end where she said something different. She had interviewed Dale 3 times over the course of 6 weeks. The final paragraph of her paper quoted, with his permission, she noted, his answer to her question about methodology. She had asked what approach he had used to gain the Volkai's trust. She had expected a description of behavioral techniques. She had her recording equipment running and her notation system ready. He had said, "I just made sure she knew I wasn't going anywhere." That was the quote, 7 words. The paragraph around it was Dr. Brandt observing that no existing framework in compact xenobiological literature on apex predator socialization contained this as a variable. She suggested it warranted its own study. Then the paper ended. People read those 7 words and sent them to other people. Lyra sent them to Dale with a message that said, "You're famous now." He sent back a message that said, "I have a coolant seal inspection in B12 at 800. She sent back a message that said, "That's extremely you." The Compact Cultural Committee, which had spent 3 weeks very carefully not discussing the situation while simultaneously generating 18 internal documents about it, eventually held a formal review session at which a junior delegate from one of the newer member species asked the simple question that everyone in the room had been thinking about, and nobody had wanted to be the one to say. Why did it work? The senior delegate from the Orvani block, who had served on the committee for 20 years and had a reputation for saying things other people were thinking, said, and this was also recorded, and also eventually made its way into various channels, because he did not approach the creature as a problem to be solved. He approached it as a being that was suffering, and he stayed. There was a silence after this. The committee moved on to other business. In the Dreven Council session, where Verk gave his formal account of the incident, he was asked a version of the same question. How had a human with no training in Volkai behavior or Dreven companion protocol succeeded in 38 days where trained professionals had not? He had thought about his answer. He gave it without hesitation. "We have been reading the Volkai as a predator seeking dominance," he said. "We have been sending beings in who were trained to assert control with technology, with chemicals, with techniques designed to overcome resistance. We were offering things that looked, from the creature's perspective, exactly like what she was running from, threats wearing different shapes." He paused. The human did not try to overcome her. He simply remained. And when the question was not, "Can you defeat me?" but only, "Will you stay?" she knew the answer immediately. It took less than a week. He looked at the council. "We have been mistaking human stillness for simplicity. I was among the beings who made this mistake. I want to be clear that I was wrong about it." The council's scribe, who had been taking notes throughout, later told her colleague that the room had gone very quiet after that. The kind of quiet that meant people were holding something they weren't ready to put down yet. The maintenance crew of Selam 7 had not waited for any formal council sessions or committee reviews to reach their own conclusions. They had formed their opinion inside 48 hours of the story becoming known, and their opinion was, broadly, "Yeah, sounds like something Dale would do, And also, can we meet her? The can we meet her question had a slightly complicated answer, which Dale navigated by explaining to anyone who asked that Grath was not a pet and was not available for introduction sessions, but that she did her rounds with him now and could be encountered in the maintenance corridors if a person happened to be there and did not do anything startling. This resulted in an interesting 3-week period during which the human maintenance crew of Selam 7 began, without coordination or announcement, routinely having reasons to be in the maintenance corridors on Dale's shift schedule. The result was a series of encounters that went, typically, as follows: Grath and Dale walking the corridor. Human crew member also in corridor doing legitimate work. Brief moment where Grath noticed the person, assessed them, and either ignored them or, if they were very still and quiet, came slightly closer to investigate. One crew member, a tall, relaxed woman from the cargo bay team who had grown up around large animals and stood with the patient ease of someone who knew how to be beside something bigger than her, had Grath take the stolen wrench out of her tool belt, carry it approximately 15 meters, and set it down. The woman had counted this as the greatest professional accomplishment of her year and told everyone she knew. Grath was in possession of 2 of Dale's work gloves, 1 socket wrench belonging to the cargo crew, and a maintenance manual that had been eaten to the point where only the cover and 3 pages survived. These were her things now. This was not negotiable. On a morning 4 months after the initial disclosure, Dale walked his assigned corridor inspection route with Grath moving at his left shoulder, her spine lights a steady and comfortable gold in the corridor light. It was a long route, 4 rings of the station's lower maintenance level, and they walked it at Dale's pace, which was unhurried without being slow. He had a thermos in the side pocket of his kit bag and a work order tablet in his other hand, and he checked junctions and noted conditions as they went, talking sometimes and sometimes not, the way he had always worked. Grath did not need to be beside him. The bond did not work like a leash. She walked beside him because she chose to, the way she had chosen to sit in front of his door that first evening, with the quiet deliberateness of a creature that had made a decision about where it belonged and saw no reason to keep reconsidering it. Other station species moved aside in the corridors. This was no longer the panicked avoidance of the first weeks. It had settled into the kind of easy, respectful space that beings give to something large and clearly purposeful. A Thervaki freight specialist nodded at Dale as they passed, which Dale returned. An Orvani technician working on a junction panel looked up, assessed Grath with the mild interest of someone who had now seen her enough times for novelty to have become familiarity, and went back to the junction. A new arrival to the station, still in the slightly overwhelmed orientation period of someone who has not yet learned where everything is, rounded a corner and stopped short. He stood with his back against the wall and his eyes at maximum diameter, staring at the creature that had just walked past him with her spine lights burning warm gold. Dale glanced back. He looked at the new arrival. He said, "She's fine. Just don't reach toward her without letting her sniff your hand first." The new arrival stared at him. He stared at Grath. He looked back at Dale. He appeared to be processing several things at once. Dale nodded pleasantly and walked on. Grath did not look back. She had assessed the new arrival in the peripheral sweep. She gave everything that entered her immediate range, filed him in the appropriate category, and moved on. They finished the route. They came back through the corridor section where B9 ran off the main junction, and Dale stopped as he sometimes did at the entrance to the old tunnel, the maintenance light still running its dim strip along the floor, the coolant seal in junction B9, 4 holding perfectly, the corridor exactly as it had always been. He stood there with his thermos and his work tablet and the large warm presence beside him. Grath sat. She did not look at the tunnel with any particular feeling on her face. She was not a being that looked backward, not in the way that required a name for it. She simply sat in the present moment of a corridor she had once hidden in and now walked through openly, with her spine lights settled and her breathing slow, and the station moving around her at its usual pace. Dale poured a cup from his thermos. The coffee was better than it used to be. Lyra had sourced a different commissary supplier as what she described as a quality-of-life improvement for everyone who shared the maintenance level. It was not excellent coffee by any standard. It was better than hot metal with ambitions, which was something. He drank it. He looked down the corridor. He thought about the protein bar he had set on the floor in the dark, which seemed like an extremely long time ago and also somehow like yesterday, the way things that change your life tend to feel. Grath leaned against his leg. Not heavily, just present. The weight of her was familiar now in the way that important constants become familiar, not noticed because they are remarkable, but noticed because their absence would be. The subsonic hum moved through the floor, through his boots, up into his chest where it settled alongside his own heartbeat, the two rhythms unhurried and even and slightly different from each other, the way two things that belong together are still two things. "Good," he said, to nothing in particular, in the tone he used for junction seals that were performing correctly and work orders that had been completed properly and mornings that had gone the way mornings should go. He finished his coffee, he capped the thermos, he checked the next item on his work order, he started walking. Grath walked beside him, her spine lights steady gold in the corridor, her step matched to his without effort, her 6 amber eyes ahead on whatever came next. The station turned in the space around them, and the maintenance route continued in somewhere in the galaxy, in conference rooms and council sessions and commissary lines, and the passing observation of a newly arrived diplomat staring at a Volkai carrying a work glove in her mouth through a corridor on a station she now called home. The story was still settling into the world, still being absorbed, still asking, quietly, what it meant about the beings who had gone looking with every tool they had and found nothing, and the one who had simply sat down in the dark and waited. The question would keep being asked for a long time. Different people would answer it differently. The answers would say as much about the people answering as they said about the story itself. The story itself did not require an answer. It was simply true. A maintenance worker and a Volkai, walking their route, getting the work done. That was all it had ever been. That was the whole of it. That was enough.